Hello everyone, and welcome to this inaugural episode of the Space Hacker, where space fans and enthusiasts alike can come together to learn and to hear the latest happenings in the space industry. In today's episode, I will talk briefly about why we started this channel. Then, let's get on with our regular segments, Space News. In the Rocket Classroom, we'll take a look at PEZ dispensers. And finally, we'll check out the timetable of launches for the week. We have so much to cover, so let's dive right in. Rockets capable of reaching orbit are nothing new. They've been around since the 1950s. But since public interest in human spaceflight reached a peak in the late 1960s with the moon landing, it's been pretty much downhill from there. Sure, we've had Skylab, the Mir space station, the Space Shuttle, and of course, the International Space Station. But contemplate this. Since 1972, humankind has not ventured higher than low Earth orbit. Yeah, you heard it right. And no, Starman doesn't count. We've rested on our laurels and called it a day when it comes to human exploration, which is kinda sad. But thankfully, the times, they are a-changin'.
Start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing.
The last decade saw the emergence of what I call New Space, a movement that eschews the long-established path to space in favor of something dynamic, something extraordinarily creative, and without the fear of failure and fallout from public scrutiny. Today, the space industry combines for a staggering $4 trillion in valuation. New Space is led by software companies disguised as rocket companies, chief among them SpaceX, which in the last decade alone has achieved something no one saw coming, except by SpaceX themselves. Since 2016, they have been routinely landing 70-meter or 230-foot tall rockets on a barge drone in the middle of the ocean, in an astonishingly disruptive effort to reduce the cost of access to space. Once the exclusive domain of state governments and heavily state-funded mega-corporations, space is now private and very commercialized. And in that ultra-competitive environment, be creative or die. We no doubt live in exciting times. There are so many stories to tell, and I believe there's room for one more YouTube channel to tell the world the exciting and history-making things that are happening right now in what used to be obscure places like Boca Chica, Texas. So come join me on a weekly ride to document history and learn some rocket science along the way. It's a history-making week as Booster 7, with all its 33 Raptor 2 engines, was rolled out to the launch site and lifted for the first time by the chopstick arms onto the orbital launch mount. After Booster 7 was positioned into place by the Self-Propelled Modular Transporter, or SPMT, the chopstick arms were lowered into place and delicately positioned under Booster 7's hard mounts just under the grid fins. Booster 7 was then slowly lowered onto the orbital launch table, with the arms making fine adjustments in 3 degrees of freedom: vertical, horizontal, and rotational. SpaceX is preparing Booster 7 for the static fire campaign. Firing those 33 Raptor engines will truly be a sight to behold. I can't wait to see what's in store for us this week. And just a few days later, on the 26th of June, Booster 7's igniters were tested. This is a clear sign that SpaceX is preparing Booster 7 for its much-awaited static fire. No flames can be seen, but you could clearly hear the igniters in this video.
Loud ignition firing. Loud ignition firing.
Under the cover of darkness, SpaceX loaded the first prefabricated segment of its new orbital launch integration tower from its manufacturing facilities in Roberts Road towards historic launch pad LC-39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Merritt Island, Florida. The segment is the first of 9 segments of a 400-foot or 122-meter tower that will send SpaceX's Starship to orbit. And just 5 days later, a large crane was used to lift segment number 1 onto its concrete base, awaiting the second segment. Losing no time, and no doubt energized by the recent FAA approval that removed the one single obstacle between SpaceX and the first orbital flight of Starship, SpaceX rolled the second of 9 orbital launch integration tower segments from its Roberts Road facility towards historic launch pad LC-39A and awaiting segment number 1 that was installed less than 2 days before. The pace at which SpaceX is moving is truly breathtaking. No doubt not a few pairs of nearby NASA eyes are taking note and making comparisons to NASA's methodical but often very protracted approach to spaceflight. And one reason for this speed is the method of construction. These tower segments did not appear overnight, but have been prefabricated over several months at SpaceX's nearby Roberts Road facility. In contrast to the original orbital launch integration tower at Boca Chica, Texas, this second tower already has things like elevators, walkways, plumbing, electrical risers, and other things that have already been pre-installed and ready to be connected when the tower sections are stacked. This construction method is much faster, and the application of previous lessons on the next iteration in a very agile and adaptive manner is SpaceX again borrowing a page from its deeply software development roots. What's unique about this tower is that it will have chopsticks arms to catch the booster and the second stage as they return back to Earth. Here's what it will look like. Massive shout out to Twitter user TijM for the stunning animation of Starship returning from orbit and being caught by the chopsticks arms. On the 23rd of June, SpaceX installed the Starlink satellite dispenser mechanism, fondly called the PEZ dispenser, into the nose cone barrel of Ship 25. In case you're wondering what PEZ dispensers are, or if you know what they are, but are scratching your head as to what candy mints have anything to do with rockets, you're in luck as we're featuring PEZ dispensers in today's The Rocket Classroom. In today's The Rocket Classroom, let's talk about PEZ dispensers. Before we can even talk about PEZ dispensers, we need to start with Starlink. You may have heard of Starlink, SpaceX's low Earth orbit, low latency, high bandwidth satellite internet constellation. SpaceX currently has 2,400 of these satellites orbiting the Earth, with plans to launch over 9,000 more and a pending application to launch another 30,000. With such a large number of satellites, you need an efficient way of launching them, even if you're SpaceX and can launch your own satellites at cost. SpaceX, ever the innovative company, surprised a lot of people by designing their satellites to be like flat-pack furniture. This way they're able to stack as many as 60 of these satellites atop their workhorse Falcon 9 rocket. Once the rocket reaches the desired orbit, a tensioning rod is released, and helped by a slight spin of the rocket's second stage, the satellites are allowed to drift from the second stage and from each other, ultimately reaching their intended stations a few months later. This works really well, until you need bigger satellites. In order for SpaceX to achieve their bandwidth and performance goals, the next generation of Starlink satellites, dubbed version 2, has to be bigger and heavier than their version 1.0 counterparts. This presents a problem for SpaceX. The Falcon 9 fairing, or the clamshell covering atop the rocket that protects the payload from the stresses of atmospheric flight, is only 5.2 meters or 17 feet in diameter. Starlink version 2.0 satellites are thought to be around 7 meters or 23 feet long. It would be too big to fit in the Falcon 9's fairing. Enter Starship and PEZ dispensers. Starship has a diameter of 9 meters or 30 feet. Plenty of room for the giant Starlink version 2.0 satellites. There's only one problem. Unlike Falcon 9, Starship's fairing cannot be jettisoned as it leaves the atmosphere. Starship is a fully reusable launch system. That means, unlike Falcon 9, which has a disposable second stage, Starship's second stage is also fully reusable. And you cannot have a reusable second stage that's missing its top half as it hurtles back towards Earth during re-entry. If you're SpaceX, what do? You could carve out a door similar to the Space Shuttle's cargo bay doors, but that would be too complicated. Enter PEZ dispensers. If you've never seen PEZ dispensers, don't fret too much. But what are they? PEZ are little rectangular shaped bricks of candy packed inside a novel plastic refillable dispenser. They become a cultural phenomenon since first emerging from Austria in 1927. Billions of these candies are produced each year and find their way into the hands of kids and adults alike, including perhaps adult kid rocket engineers who happen to work at SpaceX. The name comes from a contraction of the German word for peppermint, Pfefferminz. So, instead of building a complicated cargo bay door a la the Space Shuttle, cut up a small rectangular slot on the side of Starship, stuff a PEZ dispenser inside, and start loading your satellites. Once Starship reaches the desired altitude and trajectory, it would then deploy these satellites through the slot, much like a PEZ candy. Absolute genius. So there you have it. Now let's have a look at the launch schedule for the next 7 days. First, on the 28th of June, we've got the much anticipated moon mission, the Cislunar Autonomous Positioning System Technology Operations and Navigation Experiment. Wow, that's a mouthful. Or Capstone, riding on Rocket Labs' Electron rocket. Capstone will enter lunar orbit to test navigation and communications in the same orbit planned for the upcoming Lunar Gateway space station. Next, SES-22 will fly on a Falcon 9 rocket on the 29th of June. And on the 30th of June, STP-28A will fly on a Virgin Orbit Launcher 1 vehicle. This mission is Virgin Orbit's third operational launch and will carry 7 small satellites for government agencies. And finally, on the 30th of June, an Atlas V rocket will launch the USSF-12 mission, an experimental missile warning system for the United States Space Force. For our Mars countdown, 2022 happens to be a Mars launch window year. The launch window is on the 26th of September. If only Starship was ready. But not to worry, the next launch window is on the 17th of October in 2024. Hopefully, Starship will be ready by then. Thank you for watching. If you like the content, please hit that like button. It will be an honor for us to have you as our first subscribers. So hit subscribe and click that notification bell. Add a comment and share the video on social media. Your support means a lot and will help us grow this new channel. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram. I hope to see you again next week.